our first session, our first topic of conversation tonight will be this, is speaking to the internal alignment of a multiplying church. And one of the things that anybody who's ever tried to lead anything knows, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So you can take a strategy to try to multiply churches, but if the culture internally is not leading that direction or leaning that direction or going that direction, then your best laid plans are gonna fall flat. So let's ask some questions, and no order. Just speak up when you have a thought and want to answer it. The first question is this, and we're talking about internal alignment. And one of the most powerful elements of alignment is a governance structure of a church. And so let me ask you this question: when thinking about aspects of church governance, and the questions will be on the screen so you can review those there. What are the most important aspects of a governance structure that it is friendly to a multiplying church? What have you seen in terms of governance structure that's worked really well for a church to be multiplying disciples, leaders, and congregations? Who'd like to go first?
My mind immediately goes to Titus 1.
Okay.
I think it's verse 5 where Paul tells Titus in Crete, he's put in order what remains, he says, by appointing elders in every town. And so I get this image when I read that of the Apostle Paul and Titus with him out planting churches in various cities around this island, essentially whipping up this evangelistic dust. And then that's not good enough, though, for the Apostle Paul. So as he steps away from Crete to leave, and leaving Titus there, he says, put in order what remains by appointing elders. So, I mean, I think fundamentally, if the New Testament church is a model of multiplication, which it certainly is, at least Paul's answer to this question was appoint elders in every town. You know? There were some, the simple components of leadership and service and membership inside of a church. It's not very complex, and so it seems silly to even mention it. It's just so simple, but it seems like that's the way the New Testament, that's the government structure in which the New Testament church multiplied like wildfire, and why we're sitting here today discussing it.
Yes.
So that seems like the first and most obvious answer.
So a plurality of oversight.
Right.
A plurality of oversight, not one person doing it all, or one person having all the authority.
Yeah.
Definitely.
You use the word most important aspects on there. And it goes back to keeping the main thing the main thing. So many times shift happens to where we want to keep things internally within the church, try to keep the people we already have. And it's from an alignment perspective and the support that we're here to reach the community and see disciples made. Right? We want to build them up, as we're going to get into a little later on. But it's when the subtle shifts happen and that alignment allows that to happen.
Okay.
Yeah, I tend to agree on alignment, because I've consulted a lot of churches that have had a lot of different governance and be just as effective. But it's having that alignment where everybody's moving in the same direction. And so I think that's the key to me is not necessarily the governance, but it is the strategy and where you're building the road.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think I totally agree with him about that.
Yes.
You got, it's funny, you talk to the Reform guys and they know what the problem with every other church is. And
It's elders, you gotta have elders. That fixes everything.
That's right. And you talk to the attractional guys, and they know what the problem with and they're all in their own right multiplying if they're aligned. But if they're out of alignment, then multiplication is the first thing to go out the window. I've been working with a megachurch in the last few years, and that church was, when they were aligned, they were focused on multiplication and church planting. They even put it in their mission statement as a church. We just make disciples and multiply churches beginning in our city. And so they're focused on it, but then as soon as things got a little haywire, the first thing that went out the window was putting brakes on kind of all of their mission efforts.
And to add to that, right, and I totally agree with everyone, but right, the ultimate governance structure is Christ the head of the church.
Yes.
Right? So when Christ is removed, then a governance structure technically wouldn't work, right? But then also, if it is completely aligned, then it creates the pathway to accomplish multiplication. So I think aligned with Christ keeps you focused on the goal, the mind of Christ, the heart of Christ, the commission, the command, And then it also keeps the pathway clear.
Yes.
The opportunity, the freedom to multiply rather than all these different types of stopgaps that occurs within organizational structures.
Amen. So I hear a plurality of leadership, fully aligned under the lordship of Christ. And a lot of church governance structures can function within those parameters. Let's talk about the principles and parameters. Let's talk about for a minute some of the detrimental aspects of any governance structure that could be a hindrance to a multiplying church. What are some of the pitfalls that you guys have seen in governance structure of a church that makes it unfriendly to leadership or unfriendly to multiplying?
I think I just want to say, just going back to what we were talking about a little bit before, not to derail us, but I think alignment is more important than plurality. Now,
Okay.
I really think plurality is important personally.
Okay.
But alignment is more important than plurality. I've seen churches with a single elder that are totally aligned and on mission and clear and focused. And so I think alignment's, really when it comes down to it, I mean, there's probably some government structures that we would say those are out of bounds, but with those that are within the bounds, I think alignment's the most important thing. So, and to the question you just asked, the most detrimental piece to government structures is when they don't function properly because people don't use those structures or they fight against those structures or constantly trying to change those structures might be another one. Where I'm at, every new leader feels like they have to revamp the organizational chart and the structure in order to be able to operate inside of it. And it just, for me, it feels like, man, how many years does it take you to do that? And by the time you're done, you're toast and you're leaving anyway. And, so it feels like it's important to just operate inside of what you have existing.
Misalignment is the most detrimental thing you can have when people aren't together.
There's some practical pieces to that. Will Mancini wrote Church Unique, right? In there's a vision frame, and it's bringing clarity around your mission. And then, your values are those guiding principles, but the strategy needs to point to accomplishing that mission. And it's a dashboard.
Yeah.
And then you've got, obviously, your marks and measures. But my point to that is, if that's clear, then that becomes a marching orders for the team. So that you talk about the support of the plurality of elders, or plurality. Everybody, staff, everybody can fall in alignment with that.
Yeah.
The challenge where it comes off the rails is there's not that clarity on here's what we're doing, here's what we're called to do, and here's how we're going to accomplish that. And it also helps throw out the things that maybe we are doing that don't lead to that end goal.
Yeah, and that leads us into the next topic, unless somebody has something pressing on governance.
To me, the most detrimental aspect of any governance is focusing on the governance.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
Because that's not the what, that's the how.
Right.
And so let's stay focused on the what,
Right.
and then let's use the how to get there.
Yeah, to his point, I always say to church planners that, when they're putting together their new churches and they tend to downplay ecclesiology, governance, document structures, I say, look, this only matters when things go haywire in the church.
Yes.
It doesn't matter when everybody's unified and you're on mission all together, but there's going to come a day where there will be a wolf in the congregation or there will be some big problem that happens here, and this will potentially save you and keep you to be able to come back onto those rails and get back on mission.
Yeah.
And so I think it only really matters. So what he said is so important. It only really matters when things go haywire.
Yes.
I agree.
And to add to that, right, you have those guardrails, but the guardrails should provide freedom.
Right.
Right. So to me, some of the hindrance to the governance structure is that if there is not freedom, right, to do, to be, to serve, to be on mission as God has created me or a particular campus or church plant, then again, does the governance structure really support what ultimately we're called to do?
It can be too restrictive.
Yeah, absolutely.
It can be too
We like to
restrictive.
say guardrails, not guard dogs.
Guardrails, not guard dogs.
Yeah. They don't, that's internal
Yeah.
language in the fact that they're there for that. They're
Yeah.
not there to handle the day-to-day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I heard one pastor say it this way, that a church runs on the rails of relationship and governance. And if the relationships are good, but the governance is bad, it can run, okay? If the governance is good and the relationships go bad, it can still go. But if the governance is bad and the relationships are bad, that's how the train wreck happens.
Absolutely.
And we see that as well.
really
So
good.
detrimental aspects. Ask me after this, I'll tell you which pastor it was that said that. Let's ask the third question. What ministry programs are essential to multiplying church? When I say programs, I don't mean things like Celebrate Recovery or Financial Peace. I'm talking about programs like kids ministry, student ministry, different. What programs do you feel like are essential to a church being healthy in multiplication?
To discipleship, or just in general?
Discipleship
The
in
first-
general. You know, you may call your weekly worship gathering a program. You may call your prayer ministry a program. What programs do you feel like are essential to a multiplying church?
Yeah.
Residencies. When I say residency, I mean an intentional plan to turn members into missional leaders.
Okay.
So we disciple everybody in the church, but often the church doesn't disciple those who are closest to mission and ministry. Yeah, I love I'm not a sports guy, but when you start off in sports, you have one coach of your little league team and you got 30 kids. When you get up to the NFL, I'm talking to an NFL veteran here, and I know nothing. I literally have never watched a full football game. That you get more coaches as you get further into the career. It seems like you need less coaching, right? You've been doing it long, but you get specialized coaches, and so I think that kind of thing is true as people mature in the church. There needs to be a cloud of leaders around them, helping them to equip them for that next stage of mission and ministry. And so often what we do is we're trying to reach the lost, and we're discipling those new Christians, and then they're kind of on their own. And then by the time they get to maturity, headed toward mission, there's nobody looking after them.
Yeah.
And you say to the pastor, hey, can you mentor this guy? I don't have time to mentor this guy. Can you run a residency? I don't have time to run a residency.
Yeah.
That is the most critical. And churches wonder why they can't multiply from within, why they don't have any church planters in their pews. Well, because they're not doing anything to develop them to get them out the door.
The result is burnout,
Yeah.
and it's not growth. Right. Yeah.
So you call it residency. So
Yeah, I use residency as shorthand for an intentional program, an intentional plan to make members into missional leaders.
Okay. Leadership pipeline, school of ministry. I've heard referred to a lot of different
All
things.
of the above.
Yes.
All of the above. Anything that is a plan to take a member to a missional leader.
Okay.
Amen. Yeah.
I like that. So we do a decent job of evangelizing and giving basic tools of discipleship to someone, but churches really struggle that are not multiplying churches to have anything beyond that to help people step into their calling.
Yeah.
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 That's good. We're
I mean, I just think if you look at the spectrum too, and it's not just in, I'm a Baptist, not just in Baptist churches, across the evangelical spectrum, you've got programs and tools really heavy on the front end of the Christian life, and then you got like a big gap and then seminary. And so for me, I'm like, man, that gap is the sweet spot. I think, if I put my spiritual warfare hat on, I'm thinking the enemy is bubbling that section, because that's where the real power is taking the mature person in your congregation who loves Jesus, obeys his word, and helping him get out there to serve the Lord in another place.
We're going to get deeper into that question in just a moment, and I definitely want to hear from
Yeah.
Pastor Cedrick on
Yeah.
it, because you do a great job of this at Commitment. But
Yeah.
speak to this question, what
Well,
ministry
to
program?
add to that, right, programs, if you would, I totally agree, right? So you have overarching, right? This is how we do this, our residency. But I think you can also maybe drill down programmatically, if you will, to be able to say that we have this for adults, for youth, and for our children. And what I've seen is the beauty in discipling our children, it then allows it to easily flow into the youth, and the youth into the adults. And you can have the residency, using your terminology, again, broken down in applicable pieces, depending on the adult, the youth, and the children. And then you can have, other peripheral programs. Of course, you have men's ministry, women's ministry. All of it supports the overarching residency program. That the men are having a conversation as it relates to, are you plugged into this? The women are having the conversation as they're meeting. Are you plugged in? you know, the youth ministry, the young adults ministry, everyone is having this conversation, you know, around this residency program within the church.
So programs really aligned
Exactly.
to multiplication.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I
tend
think
to-
the nuance, no, go ahead, Tom.
I go back to alignment as you were talking.
Yeah.
But the other thing that I think is happening is, you know, when I think of what most churches think about when they talk about ministry programs, is that we will get one started and we don't know how to stop it. And then what happens is we've programmed ourselves to death, especially during the church growth movement, to where people can't get out in the community and can't multiply.
Can't meet people, really.
They can't meet their neighbor. They can't. And so now a discipleship process may be, how do you program into where people are actually in the community?
Absolutely.
You know, if you're going to serve one place. Don't serve 5 places. If you're going to be a part of a small group, be a part of one small group for accountability. You know, we used to measure how many times a person came to church, determine how committed of a Christian they were. They weren't doing anything with it. That was the fallacy of the church growth movement. And so now it's about what can you eliminate to where you can actually develop a discipling process. And it's not a program, it's a discipling process by which you can get people engaged in all aspects of the church.
That's good. That's good. I want to get into that in just a moment about the problems that programs can create. Before we do that, you had a word on this?
Just, words matter, and it's more of a nuance, but we think program, and that's very canned. It's how do we shift to a culture
Yes.
of developing leaders,
Yep.
right? Across
Yep,
our middle
exactly.
schoolers and our high schoolers
Yes.
are our next church planners,
Yeah.
are our next missionaries,
Yeah.
are our next worship leaders to go
Yeah.
out with those teams, right?
Yeah.
And so we've got to give them, we've got to create in our churches
Yeah.
a culture of developing folks.
Yes.
And then I think there's one thing that was said a little earlier about we've got the front end, the tip of the spear good. We're good at inviting people in the church. We're not, the church in general, we're not good at equipping our people to live on mission, to go and evangelize in their workplace, in their schools, in their neighborhoods, or the ball field.
Yeah.
In general, right?
Yeah.
And so if we're going to, now we can get a big front door and close a big back door,
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
but send them out appropriately.
Yeah.
Yes. This, picking up on the themes that are coming out of the conversation, let's go to question 4, which speaks to this, which programs that can be a hindrance to a multiplying church. Now, I'll add to this question too, because we've all referenced programs can be overwhelming and they can create more people coming to church rather than being the church in the community. You know, what are some things you see churches getting entangled with or getting distracted with that prevent them from being effective in multiplication?
Yeah.
You know, we talk about Simple Church was, you know, a movement, 15, 20 years ago, whenever that
Yeah.
became,
Yeah.
you know, a real focal point. And complication prevents effectiveness, really, to anything. So what ministry
Yeah.
programs can be a hindrance to multiplying
Yeah.
church? What do we need to stop doing that we are
Well-
tempted to do?
Well, John, I personally think every program should be on the table to discuss. In
Yeah.
other words, that if it isn't aligning, if it isn't helping build the culture, right, it should be cut. It should be eliminated. It should be, well, does this add value? Does this help us move towards making disciples of people of all nations, tribes, and tongues? If it doesn't, why are we doing it? You know, if it's not helping us fulfill the Great Commission, if it isn't, why are we doing it? You know, what's the meaning of it? What's the purpose? Is it because we've done it all? You know, for 25 years we've done this.
Yeah.
And maybe it's even, you know, borne some fruit. But is it really sustainable and move us closer to greater alignment and developing that culture that Christ died for?
Sure. I like that. I think this entire project that I'm working on is using this church, Salem Church, as sort of a test case scenario, a church that has a long history of great ministry, great impact, but has struggled to be multiplication minded and struggled to be effective in multiplication over the course of its entire history. And I think a lot of churches are in that place. They may be in a strategic area that needs more churches, but the pastors and the leaders don't know how to make that transition.
Yeah.
Because every one of those programs are beloved because they are people that were
Yeah,
saved through those
yeah,
programs. They
absolutely.
were impacted by those programs.
Yeah.
So cutting a program is more than a budget line and a date on the calendar. It's people. It's people who really believe in them. So can you speak a little bit toward the shepherding that's needed to make a change? I mean, you've been where you are for 26 years. So any program you're going to cut is one you started.
Yeah.
So at one point, you were making the argument for it 10 years ago, and people got on board with you, right? And now no, we're not doing that anymore. Talk to me, anybody really, about shepherding people through difficult changes to be effective at multiplication.
You want to lead?
Cedrick's easy to. I would say one thing. It may not be cutting. It may be adjusting.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
Right?
That is,
you know,
yeah.
I grew up in a construction industry. My dad was, and every week I had to clean the garage out because every week it got full of building materials. I was going to use a different word. That would happen as a result of. And I think ministry is that way sometimes. We start
Yeah.
to get off the mark.
Yeah.
Or it started out with, our return on investment was this, but it actually moved into something different that's not wrong. We just have to re-look at that and say, does that, even though it's adjusted, does it help us accomplish the goal,
Yeah,
the mission,
yeah,
what we're talking about? So I wouldn't be so quick to put a bullet in it as I would to say, let's reevaluate
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
and see what it's doing.
Yeah.
But then, knowing that ministry is driven by people,
Yes.
Yeah.
and our responsibility is to help shepherd them through that process. And that's not always a quick decision today.
Yeah.
There's got to be the concentric circles of influence. Who do we want to have conversations with to shepherd them through that?
Yes.
And at least have their voice heard.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I
good word.
agree.
That's a great point. Sometimes it's a strategically placed new leader in an existing ministry that understands where you want that ministry to go. There's opportunities for change, especially I'm in a transient area. Lots of us are in transient areas. There's lots of new ministry leaders coming in and other ones going out all the time. Lots of opportunities to tweak and adjust. And I agree. I think you have equity built up in a program. You have that's not to be just tossed aside. Usually there's something good to be redeemed out of that. Yeah.
That's good.
I've often heard people talk about, as a leader, what we're supposed to do is we're supposed to build the road. And if they're going to go down the road that you build. All you have to do is look at the interstate highways in America today, and you'll see that that's where the development took place, is where the interstates led you. So the leader builds the road. I agree, we don't need to spend effort trying to kill programs, because you'll spend more effort trying to kill something than you will be creating something.
Oh gosh.
Spend your effort creating something, building the road, and then let the legacy just take care of itself. Don't try to focus there. When you put your focus here, what will happen over time, these people are saying, why are we doing that? And you just say, well, I don't know. You want to stop it? Let them stop it.
Yeah.
Because you'll waste all your effort trying to kill something instead of trying to build something.
Yeah.
I heard it said by my pastor and mentor, move with those that'll move with you. Take those that are willing to go with you and go. And then before long, folks will embrace and see the energy and the way God's moving and want to embrace it together.
Yeah. I think another way, I agree with everything. Just to add to that, I think a way to help navigate through that is also to have a template and or a way of evaluating every ministry. In other words, after this event is over, or after we've done this for a period of time, let's pause, let's evaluate. And then again, you have the guardrails that says, are we accomplishing, is this leading us there? I think that helps. I think another thing that helps, I've seen personally, is when there's this intentional communication about why do you do what you do. And secondly, you can't do it alone. Are you adding to your team, And I believe when you add to your team, it creates that tension because you have new ideas, you have new hearts, you have new minds, passions that are added to it that will either tweak it or kill it.
Yes.
No, so natural tension would occur that says, should we keep doing this?
Yes.
And or it will even create tension to say, well, maybe my tenure here has ended and I should be serving somewhere else and release it to someone. And that person brings new life and our vision and et cetera. So I think, again, staying focused on what the main theme is. If that ministry leader is making disciples themselves, you have that natural, necessary tension that keeps the ministry healthy, keeps that leader sharp, focused. And again, the shepherding aspect is asking the questions. Is this leading those people that you're called to serve in that direction of ultimately becoming disciples of Christ?
That's great. That's great. I want to lean into that leadership development piece we touched on before. I'm going to skip down to question 6. What pathways for leadership development are created in effective multiplying church? You mentioned residencies. We referred to them different ways. Let's talk nuts and bolts. I'll give you an example of my church. Someone came to me on Sunday who's in business and has been a faithful volunteer, a faithful leader in our church for a long time. As pastor, I'm called to ministry. I really do believe God's calling me to ministry. What do we do? What do effective multiplying churches have in place for the person who has either a curiosity or even feels they have a calling to the gospel ministry and to be a multiplier themselves?
So the thing that comes to mind when you say that is that situation you just described where the member comes to you, if that's the only way that new people are entering the ministry in your context, initiated by the person who's sensing the call, then you're not likely to do much in terms of multiplication and deploying leaders.
Okay.
A church that has a multiplying posture is proactive, not reactive to those who are. So I don't know why our church wound up this way. It was something because it was bred inside of me, but I would see qualities in somebody that look pastoral, or I would see the raw materials that I could imagine God using to make a pastor in somebody. And I would, text them and say, hey, can we get breakfast? I got something really important I want to talk to you about. And I'd sit down with them and say, hey, I don't know if God's calling you into ministry or not. I have no idea if you ever even thought about it, but I want you to know as your pastor, if he was, I'd be eager to walk with you and help you get ready for that ministry.
So proactivity, yes.
That sort of proactivity can happen in an unprogrammed relational kind of way, but it has to be intentional from the leadership of the church if we hope to do it on a large scale. People, you look at the church I planted 17 years old. We've got 30 churches in our family of churches right now. How'd that happen? Well, it happened because we weren't afraid to fail, and it happened because we were super proactive. Those are the simple answers.
Okay.
It wasn't because we had a slick program. Now we have a program for it, but it was in the beginning there wasn't something like that. So I think it's just the big word for me is like proactivity. We've got to be.
I'd agree 100%. There's many facets to it, not all encompassed here, but one is it's got to be celebrated, right? What do you talk about from the stage? What do you celebrate? What do you talk about in your groups and all the layers down? And there's got to be opportunities for people to serve and grow, developing leaders, at every area of the leadership pipeline. And so leadership development is everybody's responsibility, whether you're a staff member or a significant lay leader on there. And that's where you celebrate it up and down. And this is where you start to get, again, a little more tactical, but alignment has to happen across the different ministry platforms. So if somebody starts out in kids ministry but wants to go into student ministry or guest services or creative arts, if your structure is different, they don't cross over as easy.
Okay.
We're actually creating barriers for people to get over there and not alignment.
Almost competing systems in some ways.
Or it's insider language that they don't know the code to.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So proactivity.
Celebration and alignment.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
What else?
To me, this is a very complicated topic.
Okay.
And the reason that it is because you first have to start with the person that you're thinking about.
Mm-hmm.
And what kind of leader should they be based on their giftedness? How gifted are they? And then the second, and so now it's working with them of who they are and where they are, and now helping them reach their fullest potential.
Okay.
But to me, the second aspect, normally when we think about leadership development, we're thinking about leadership development inside the church.
Mm-hmm.
I want to know, as a church, how do we develop leaders to go out
Yes.
and to be outward focused? And it's not just about a program that we have here in church or parking cars. Those are very important. I'm not trying to minimize that, but I'm saying a lot of times we'll paint a box and it's the wrong type of box. I know a banker one time that was in my church, and he didn't come to church on Sunday night because he was trying to keep a factory from closing to try to keep 600 people with their jobs. Man, that's a leader.
Yeah.
I love what Clint said, though. I think it's important that we embrace that, and it's giving people the opportunity to fail forward. I mean, we get to do that in a controlled environment, allow them to grow in that. And too many churches are afraid to let people fail.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with everyone here. And just to add to that, when you look at Jesus, his model, he went amongst the people and he found his disciples.
Yes.
And I think that's something to model. He prayed, he fasted, he went, and he was always searching. And I think that's something that we must always be doing. I think additionally, when you see the levels of leadership around Christ, right? You have the 70, you have the 12, you have the Peter, James, and John, and really you have one that was at the foot of the cross.
Yes.
So I think there will always be the 70, and not to mention the bread and fish folks. It's only coming for the fish fry and the barbecues and the events. There's always going to be people out there that you want them to matriculate through to come to that place of that intimacy and relationship, even with you in Christ.
Yes.
So I think there should always be that intentionality of moving people closer and closer to the foot of the cross. But that does begin first by us going out among them, being alert, discerning who is gifted, called, and then tying what you just said, brother, as it relates to letting them fail forward, because you're not going to give your 7-year-old son the keys to the car. But you let him ride his bike maybe down to the corner, right? And then eventually, okay, you can go around the block.
Yeah.
And then eventually, as you mature and you become prepared, you get the keys to the car. And I think there's something to release in the 70s, go do what I did and what you saw me do because you've been close enough to me, and then report back to me. And I think and that can happen just so naturally, and as you just over coffee, over relationships, inviting them into your home, you're going into their homes. And it can be not something okay, this is my system, but it's sincere relationship building in the process.
That's good.
Yeah.
Let me ask, just to wrap up this question, does anybody have a system right now that you're just in love with? Residency-wise, leadership development, school of ministry? Is there something out there? I know you created your own, because you started doing it 26 years ago. Is there any system out there now that a church like Salem or another church that wants to be a multiplying church and get good at developing their leaders internally, is it out there?
I would say you would contextualize it for you. The beauty is, amongst the brotherhood, Cedrick would share, Clint would share, you got what NAM's done with the L1, L2, L3, and you figure out what works for you, right? Take the good pieces and throw out the ones that don't fit.
Sure.
Right? I would just add, we have a shared file that we call them ducks on a pond, horrible name, but at the end of the day, there's names on there that leadership see and recognize. We got to put him on the list or her on the list because we want to tap their shoulders.
Yeah.
Very good.
May I add something? You brought up something, brother, a while back in this question about the horizontal alignment, right? The alignment that allows people to cross. And one thing that I've seen and learned over the years is that so many times ministries can become territorial, right? And then now they're all operating in silos. But yet there's a gifted person over here in this ministry that really belongs over here. And this other person over here belongs over here. But to be able to have the ministry leaders really share information and are even really honestly give the privilege that you're not stealing someone from their ministry. But if someone says, hey, you see that brother, man, I know he's serving in your ministry, or that sister, can I talk to him about potentially serving over here with me? And being able to have that cross pollination, I think, is also healthy.
Organizations that do great with leadership development across the board outside the church, they cross-train everything.
Yeah.
I mean, I work with the U.S. Marines. My church is full of them. And, I mean, those guys, they have an MOS, they have a job, but they learn how to do everything over the course of their career, and they have these rhythms of command and learning, the command in school, where they're constantly, either leading or backing up and learning so that they can lead better next time. And anytime I see an organization that's crushing it in leadership development, it has to do with the fact that they have those kind of rhythms built in, and I think that's really important. To your question here, I also wanted to say, you asked the question, is there a program that you're really in love with right now? And the answer is yes, my program. and they're in love with their program, and he's in love with his program, and they should be.
Yeah.
Chesterton said, my favorite quote of all time, anything worth doing is worth doing poorly at first, okay? And,
good.
You hear that quote and you think, oh, he's advocating for doing things poorly. But it was written, if you read it in context, he's talking about educating your children. And he's saying, essentially what he's saying is, it's my job to educate my children. I can't farm that out to somebody else. It's essentially what he's saying is, even if John's a better dad than I am, I can't give my kid to John because God gave me that responsibility. In the same way, God's given each of us as pastors the responsibility of leading our churches to fulfill the Great Commission. We can't farm that out to anybody else. And churches have become far too comfortable farming out their primary responsibility. It would be like us shipping our kids off to boarding schools all over the place and saying, you take care of mission for our kids. Like, these are my people that I'm supposed to disciple. I'm going to stand before God and give an account for the way I led them. And I have to do it poorly at first and then get better at it and get better at it and get better at it so that one day I'm decent at it.
That's a good word.
Yeah.
Let's wrap up this first session by talking about money, talking about the dollars. Every church has got a limited resource, and that limited resource is probably spoken for beyond even what the budget will allow. Multiplication is not cheap, and it's not done without sacrifice. So how does a church that desires to be a multiplying church, how to effect a multiplying church budget for multiplication while also managing operational and ministry demands as well? Like, what are there guiding principles that they abide by, in terms of stewarding those resources, and not only them as leaders stewarding, but the people embracing those things as well. That there may be things that the people would like to see their church do that maybe we don't do because we're prioritizing multiplication in some form. Anybody have something to offer in this conversation?
This is probably more discouragement than encouragement from a standpoint of, if we try to put it, I come from the business world, if we try to put it in a nice P&L, it doesn't work.
Okay.
I'm not saying don't be a good steward of resources and take prudent action, but the first 2 church plants that we ever sent out, when we commissioned teams, standing behind Brian Bloy, our founding pastor, senior pastor, was our top givers in the church. And the next people weren't even close. And so that's where, through the crucible of that, you had to realize, are you really committed to multiplying and seeing new churches planted, or missionaries sent out, or is it just something you want to show on social media? And so it takes guts, and that's where we've done a special offering, right? Because we want to lead with a yes and watch God fill in the backside, right? And God's done that time and time again. But not to be trite, if it doesn't start with prayer,
Right.
then we're just trying to sometimes with the wrong motive in mind on there. And so we have a prayer strategy for that.
Okay.
But we hold loosely, but we want to be generous in our commitments.
Amen. That's a good word.
Yeah.
Any others on this topic?
I mean, I got a lot to say about this. The one thing that comes to mind is money. In my experience, I started the church that I'm now leading to multiply. So we started off with nothing at all, and money follows vision. Though, like when you have a clear vision that's compelling, people give to that compelling vision. I'm amazed at how differently our different church planning projects fund up. You know, some of them, I look at the line item and go, where did all that money come from? And some of them, I look at that money and go, where is all the money? You know, and it has everything to do with the way the primary vision caster is communicating about what they're doing. And if it's plausible to people. People don't want to write the last check to a dying church plant. I mean, they just don't want to do it. Nobody wants to do that. And so, but people are excited and happy and joyful and generous to give when, in my experience, when, especially when there's a culture that's been created of that's the big celebration. And so, you know, I feel like I feel like the church planning budget line item is limitless. When you look at that, and so I think of them as totally separate in our church budget. I think of you know, we have an operating expenses budget that's what it takes to run our operations. But then this other side, the church planning side, yeah, there's money budgeted for that, but there's also always limitless possibilities over there if we can create a compelling vision for what we're going to do.
And it goes back with celebration, some of the stuff we were talking about earlier. People do a line behind that.
They really do. And our church is, again, 17 years old, and we're still meeting in elementary school. And we haven't seen explosive growth, but steady growth over the years. And the one thing I can say for sure is people consistently entrust us with their resources on the church planning side. We have as much money come in every year that comes in just dedicated to church planning as for our entire budget altogether, like allocated money for church planning. And that just is because people know, even when they move off to other places, they know I can send my money back there and allocate it for church planning. It's going to get used right, you know. And I think that is something that, you know, if you build the systems for that and you build the reputation for that, people will entrust you with their resources, because there are a lot of people out there who have the opposite problem. They have resources, but no vision for what to do with it. And so I didn't know that in the beginning. I wish I would have known that. If I'd have known people like that existed, I would have been a lot more aggressive to go get money from them. But man, it's totally true. There are people that are scratching their heads saying, we can't see anything to give our money to. You know?
And you've done that consistently over the 17 years. So that's a culture that's been developed within your people.
Yeah, for sure.
So I to that point, some people want to come out of the gates and be church planning catalysts tomorrow. And there is no microwave to that, right? You got to look at the consistency of raising up and sending out and celebrate those things.
Amen.
There's a stewardship is so critically important on this question, but I don't want us to gloss over that certain church planning contexts are much more difficult than others. And so now I think about it, and I forgot who said it, it's a very famous quote, is you have rope holders and you have the pit goers. And as far as multiplying churches, I think that we need to identify those churches that can hold the ropes for others to go down in the pits, but don't expect the guy going down in the pit to be a multiplying church as far as holding ropes for other churches, because I am telling you, some of the churches Kevin and I have worked with, they're going to need financial assistance probably for the next 10 years, because they are ministering in very, very difficult situations. And so just don't gloss over that everything can just turn out rosy. You know, understand that context. And now how can we build a network of all churches and identify those people that are able to hold the rope for somebody else to go down in the pit. And so I think we almost have to work outside of ourselves and collaborate with other networks and whatnot to do that.
I would say, though, even that, I don't disagree with what he said, but even in that, when there's a compelling vision from the field, so I'm not talking about from the suburban wealthy church, I'm talking about from the inner city of Baltimore. Like if that church planner has a compelling vision, there are suburban churches that will line up to give money to that thing that they believe in. And I've got a few church planners that I work with in DC and Baltimore that are so good and compelling at what they do that they have more money than they need to do what they need to do in those contexts. And one of the concerns I have with some of those is like, hey, when you're not the leader here anymore, how's this church going to survive? Because you're so good at mobilizing resources,
But that was the point I was trying to make, is understanding that church that may be that inner city church, there's funding out there.
Yeah.
They got to identify who those rope holders
That's right.
are to help them.
That's right, yeah.
And the flip side of that is those churches that may need funding cannot rely on the rope holders or the rope extenders because ultimately they will reach a place, they should reach a place that the vision outpaced the giving. In other words, that you have to trust the Lord.
Yeah.
To say, God, we need you to intervene for us. So therefore I would say with the budget, I think we all agree to this, is that a budget should never control multiplication. You follow me? In others, it should never stall it. It should never cause us to be delinquent in responding to what God is telling us to do, because His promise is, if we are multiplying, right, Great Commission, I will be with you.
Yes.
And if He's with us, He's going to provide for us.
I have this poster on the wall in my office where we do our residency meetings that I've had for the last 5 years or so, because I said it so much, I just got sick of saying it. I put it on a poster on the wall. But church planning is free. We have these the 10 church planning rules that I say all the time. But church planning is free because I want them to know that fundamentally what church planning is free. It's sharing Jesus, making disciples, gathering people together. All that can be done. So I can't tell you the number of conversations I have with wannabe church planners, potential church planners, aspiring church planners who say essentially like, I can't do it because so-and-so won't give me this, so-and-so won't give me that. And I say like, church planning's free. Like all that stuff is extra. It's wonderful stuff. It's helpful, but it's never stopping you from not doing it. So I think in every context, even in difficult contexts, there's a sustainability question. Like, is it even wise to build this on resources from the suburban church, or can we build this on a bivocational, co-vocational, setup?
Yeah. So I agree with that, and I think I was sharing with you all offline that I hit a tension point that we were like, okay, how do we multiply? How do we multiply? And the Lord just spoke to me and said, well, how did commitment start? You didn't have any money. All you had were people who didn't know what they were doing, but they believed in a vision. And here you are 25, 26 years later. And the other part of the just processing that was, it was like, Cedrick, have you ever seen a child born full grown?
That's a good word.
So have you ever seen my church born, multiplied?
Fully formed, yeah.
Fully formed.
Sure.
You follow me? So
Yes.
so what easy can happen is if you send 100 people out with it, well, sometimes that church plant can become entitled. Like, oh, well, mothership, help me, right? And keep feeding me versus, no, your resource is Jesus.
Amen.
And His budget is endless because the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, and everything that it contains. And I've seen in our history, we've had people give who've never ever set foot in our church. We have non-believers give to the work.
The
You-
hindrance
you
could
know,
be
so,
lack of resources, right?
yeah.
As we move forward, we're talking about different models, bivocational, co-vocational. Churches got to join arms with other churches.
Partnerships.
So what's it look like to help send out collectively,
Yes.
but also support internally? Right? So instead of having a church bear all of the infrastructure that is in a traditional church, how do we keep some of that so that they can run leaner and cleaner for their area? So we got to take the old model and not throw it out, but say, how do we re-engineer that in this new context?
Yes.
Yeah.
As we were talking labor rates and all those kind of things that are happening right now, we got to deconstruct everything and to ultimately, how do we accomplish the mission? You know, it's almost the Apollo conversation, right? We got all this duct tape and this, how do we help get that capsule back here? We got to send out leaders, if we're developing them, how do we help send them out in different contexts, in different ways? And there is no one size fits all.
Right.
Correct.
That's a good word. We're going to wrap up our first session together. I want to thank you guys for taking time to process through the internal alignment piece.